Why did no one look at her when the briefing ended, like she wasn't even in the room? Maria Santos stood behind the steam-stained counter of the mess hall, stirring a pot that had been simmering since before sunrise. The spoon moved in slow, steady circles. Muscle memory. Control. The kind of rhythm you fall into when you don't want to think too hard about time passing. Outside, the Afghan desert was already waking up, dust lifting into the air, rotor wash from distant helicopters rattling the windows. Inside, the mess hall smelled like onions, cumin, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. No one noticed her. They never did. She was just the cook. The men came through in waves, boots heavy, rifles slung, eyes scanning corners even while grabbing trays. They talked in fragments, acronyms, half-finished sentences, the kind of language that told you everything and nothing at the same time. Maria kept her eyes down. That was the rule, not written, just understood. She served eggs, bacon, bread she baked herself when supplies allowed. She memorized preferences without meaning to. Extra salt, no cheese, hot sauce every time. She noticed who ate fast and who didn't eat at all. She noticed everything. But she said nothing. At 32, Maria had learned that silence was its own kind of armor. She hadn't come here for glory, or patriotism, or even purpose. She had come for money, clean, steady money that paid for hospital bills back home in Texas. Her mother's hands shook now. Her lungs weren't what they used to be. The doctors spoke gently when they said the word chronic, like softness could make it less permanent. So Maria signed a contract. 8 months into it, she was still counting days. The SEAL team had arrived 3 weeks earlier. She knew who they were the moment they walked in, not because of patches or posture, but because of the way the room subtly shifted around them. Conversations dipped, chairs scraped softer, even the air felt tighter. Their leader, Morrison, always nodded when he passed her, polite, distant, like you acknowledge furniture you respect but don't need to understand. Rodriguez thanked her every time. Medic, kind eyes, too kind for a place like this. Thompson joked too much. Jokes were how he breathed. Harrison barely spoke at all. Williams ate like tomorrow wasn't promised. Maria learned their names the same way she learned everything else, by listening when no one thought she mattered. That morning, helicopters came in. You said. Part 1 with 1,000 plus. ChatGPT said. Why did no one look at her when the briefing ended, like she wasn't even in the room? Maria Santos stood behind the steam-streaked counter of the mess hall, stirring a pot that had been simmering since before sunrise. The spoon moved in slow, deliberate circles, not rushed, not careless. The kind of motion you learn when you've spent years keeping yourself steady so nothing spills, especially not fear. The forward operating base was already awake. Outside, rotor wash from distant helicopters kicked dust into the air. Generators hummed. Boots scraped gravel. Somewhere, a radio crackled with clipped voices that sounded calm because they had to be. Inside, the mess hall smelled of onions, cumin, and coffee strong enough to cut through exhaustion. The kind of coffee soldiers drank like medicine. No one noticed her. They never did. To them, she was just the cook. Men filed through in waves, rifles slung low, eyes scanning corners even while grabbing trays. They spoke in fragments, acronyms, coordinates, half-sentences that ended when someone walked too close. The language of people who lived with secrets like second skin. Maria kept her eyes down. That was the rule, not written anywhere, just understood. She served eggs, bacon, flatbread she baked herself when supply convoys allowed. She remembered preferences without meaning to. Extra salt, no cheese, hot sauce every time. She noticed who ate fast and who barely touched their food, who joked too loud, who stared into space like they were already somewhere else. She noticed everything. But she said nothing. At 32, Maria had learned silence could be its own kind of armor. She hadn't come to Afghanistan for adventure or honor. She hadn't come chasing meaning. She had come because her mother's medical bills didn't care about dreams, and overseas contracts paid better than anything she could find back home in Texas. Her mother's voice still echoed in her head during quiet moments, soft now, tired, always apologizing for needing help. So Maria signed the contract. 8 months in, she was counting days like a prisoner marks walls. The SEAL team arrived 3 weeks earlier. She knew who they were the moment they stepped inside, not because of patches or rank, but because of the way the room changed around them. Conversations dropped half a notch. Chairs scraped more quietly. Even the air seemed to tighten like it was paying attention. Their leader, Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, always nodded when he passed her. Polite, controlled, a man used to weighing risk in every movement. Rodriguez thanked her every time. Medic, kind eyes, the kind that noticed pain even when people tried to hide it. Thompson joked constantly. Jokes were his shield. If he kept talking, maybe fear wouldn't get a word in. Williams ate like tomorrow wasn't guaranteed. Harrison barely spoke at all. Maria learned their names the same way she learned everything else, by listening when no one thought she mattered. That morning, the helicopters came in early. She heard them before she saw them, the deep, familiar thump that rattled the mess hall windows. She glanced up just long enough to see two Black Hawks settling onto the landing zone. The team was back, earlier than expected. Her hands moved faster without her telling them to. Coffee brewed stronger. Portions grew heavier. She slid cinnamon rolls into the oven, her grandmother's recipe, adjusted for whatever ingredients the supply chain hadn't failed to deliver this week. She told herself it was routine. It didn't feel like routine. When the SEALs walked in, their silence was heavier than usual. Faces drawn, movements efficient but tight. Morrison's jaw was set like something had almost gone wrong, or had. Maria filled plates without comment. She placed coffee cups gently, like noise itself might be dangerous. For the first time since they arrived, Morrison met her eyes. "Thank you, Maria," he said quietly. "This smells incredible." She froze for half a heartbeat. Most soldiers didn't know her name. "You're welcome, sir," she said, recovering quickly. "Cinnamon rolls will be ready in 10 minutes. A flicker of something crossed his face. Relief maybe, or gratitude. "We'll wait," he said. As they sat in their usual corner, Maria noticed small things. Rodriguez's fingers trembled when he lifted his mug. Thompson wasn't joking. Harrison's eyes kept drifting to exits. Something had happened. She didn't ask. 3 days later, the base changed. Extra guards, new checkpoints, civilian badges reissued with stricter movement limits. Meetings ran longer, voices lowered. The rhythm of the place shifted from tired to tense. Maria felt it in her bones. She kept working, prepping, cleaning, serving meals to people who looked like they were preparing for something they couldn't name out loud. On Friday evening, Rodriguez approached the counter, his usual warmth replaced with something brittle. "Maria," he said quietly, leaning closer than usual, "if anything happens, get to the kitchen freezer." She paused mid-stir. The freezer. Reinforced walls, one entrance, safest spot in this building. Her stomach tightened. Is something wrong? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Just precautions. He filled his tray and walked away. That night, Maria didn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bunk listening to engines, boots, distant radio chatter. The base felt like it was holding its breath. The next morning, Morrison stopped her personally. "There may be training exercises today," he said. "Loud noises, simulated explosions." "Simulated?" She nodded. "Should I prepare extra rations?" "Yes," he said after a beat. "Food that travels well." Then quieter, If alarms sound, protect yourself first. The words lingered long after he walked away. By nightfall, the mess hall was quiet, too quiet. As the SEAL team prepared to leave, Harrison paused at the counter. "The cinnamon rolls," he said, "reminded me of home." It was the first time he'd spoken to her. "Stay safe," she replied. Morrison was last. "Promise me something," he said. "If anything happens, don't try to be a hero." She nodded. She meant it. At 2:47 a.m., the first shot rang out. And the world Maria knew shattered in a single sound. Sometimes destiny doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it kicks the door in. Why did the ground feel so close the moment the alarm screamed, like it was pulling her down before she could think? The sound tore through the night without mercy, sharp, mechanical, final. Maria Santos woke on the floor before she remembered leaving the bed. Her heart slammed against her ribs like it was trying to escape first. The second shot came half a breath later, followed by the unmistakable whistle of incoming mortars. Training orientation videos, evacuation diagrams. None of it mattered now. She crawled instead of standing. Instinct over pride. The trailer shook as something exploded nearby, dust raining from the ceiling like it had been waiting for permission. Somewhere outside, men shouted orders she couldn't make out. She grabbed the emergency bag at the foot of her bunk and pulled it close like it could shield her from sound. "Get low, stay away from windows." Her father's voice surfaced without warning, calm, firm, a Marine who had seen too much and talked too little. "Fear doesn't mean stop, Mija. It means move carefully." The door to her trailer burst open under her hand, and the night swallowed her whole. The base was chaos. Red tracer rounds cut lines through darkness. Muzzle flashes lit buildings in violent stutters. The air smelled like burning metal and dust, thick enough to taste. Maria stayed low, sprinting when the noise dipped, freezing when it surged again. The freezer. That was the plan. 200 yards of open ground stretched between her and the mess hall. It might as well have been 2 miles. Halfway across, a mortar hit the building to her left. The blast threw her sideways. She hit the ground hard, breath knocked clean out of her lungs. For a moment all she could hear was ringing, high-pitched, relentless. When her vision cleared, she saw them. Figures moving through smoke, not American, mismatched clothing, AKs slung loose like they were extensions of their arms. Her blood turned to ice. She pressed herself against a supply shed, willing her body to become shadow. The men passed close enough that she could smell sweat and oil. One laughed, short, sharp. She didn't breathe until they were gone. When she reached the mess hall doors, her hands were shaking. Inside, the building felt wrong, too quiet, too still. She was running for the freezer when she heard it. American voices. Pain in them. She stopped. Every warning Morrison had given her rose at once. Protect yourself first. But then she heard Rodriguez. Stay with me, Thompson. Don't close your eyes. Maria didn't think. She opened the freezer door. Cold hit her like a wall. White light. The hum of the unit fighting to keep ice frozen in a war zone. Rodriguez was slumped against crates, blood soaking his pant leg. Thompson lay on the floor, pale, breathing shallow. Blood pooled beneath him, dark and spreading. Maria, Rodriguez stared at her like she was a mirage. You should have evacuated. I wasn't evacuated, she said, already moving. Kneeling, assessing. Thompson's shoulder was torn open. Bad, too much blood. Rodriguez tried to sit up and failed. We lost Morrison. Radio's dead. He told us to shelter. Maria swallowed hard. She saw the problem immediately. The bandages weren't enough. The bleeding was arterial. I need supplies, she said. No, Rodriguez snapped. You're not going out there. She met his eyes. I'm already here. The tunnels. She knew them. Maintenance access. Forgotten paths built before anyone thought civilians would need to run for their lives. She grabbed towels, bottled water, a knife she sterilized with flame and shaking hands. Then she disappeared into the dark. The tunnels were narrow, claustrophobic. She crawled on elbows and knees, phone flashlight bouncing with every breath. Explosions above sent dust raining down, choking her. She wanted to cry. She didn't. At the medical station she worked fast. IV fluids, antibiotics, anything that could buy time. The bag was heavy on the way back. The freezer was worse. Thompson was unconscious now. Rodriguez was barely holding on. Maria's hand steadied the moment she touched the IV line. Muscle memory, focus, everything else faded. Outside, footsteps approached. Voices not English. The freezer door rattled. She positioned herself between the wounded men and the door, knife useless in her hand, heart hammering. Seconds passed. Then the voices moved away. She exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. She worked until dawn, until the bleeding slowed, until the IV dripped steady. When Boots finally came, American Boots, she didn't cry. She just sat back, exhausted beyond words. Morrison stood in the doorway, stunned. What happened here? Rodriguez smiled weakly. She saved us. Maria finally felt the weight of it all crash down. Sometimes courage isn't loud. Sometimes it just refuses to leave. Why did the silence after the gunfire feel heavier than the attack itself, like the night was waiting to judge what she had done? For a moment after the freezer door opened, no one spoke. Cold air spilled into the ruined kitchen. The hum of the unit faded beneath the sounds of boots, radios, and controlled urgency. Flashlights swept the room, catching on blood-streaked tiles, overturned carts, the knife Maria still held loosely in her hand. Lieutenant Commander Morrison stood frozen in the doorway. Not because he didn't understand what he was seeing. Because he did. Thompson lay stabilized, an IV line taped cleanly to his arm. Rodriguez was conscious, pale but alert, pressure bandages wrapped tight and precise. And between them sat Maria Santos, knees drawn in, clothes soaked with blood that wasn't hers, hands steady even now. What happened here? Morrison asked quietly. Rodriguez answered for her. His voice was hoarse but firm. She saved our lives, sir. Williams and Harrison moved immediately, lifting Thompson with practiced care. Morrison didn't take his eyes off Maria. You went out, he asked. She nodded once. The adrenaline was draining now, leaving exhaustion so deep it felt like gravity had doubled. They needed help, she said. I couldn't just wait. No one argued. As they evacuated the wounded, the base came back into focus. Buildings scarred, smoke curling into the dawn, casualties being counted in low voices. Morrison walked her back toward the civilian trailers. What you did tonight, he said, choosing his words carefully, goes far beyond your job. Maria looked at the destruction around them. Will they live? Yes, he said without hesitation, because of you. The medical officer stopped short when he examined Thompson. Who treated him? Morrison pointed, our cook. The doctor looked again, closer. This is excellent field medicine. Maria felt heat rise to her face. She didn't know what to do with praise. It sat awkwardly like borrowed clothing. Word spread anyway. By the next day, people were looking at her differently. Not with awe, with something quieter, respect edged with disbelief. She didn't want attention. She told Morrison as much. I just want to finish my contract, she said. Go home. He smiled gently. Sometimes heroism doesn't ask permission. Within days, reporters were calling. Her mother called too, terrified, proud, crying all at once. Maria felt overwhelmed. She had acted because there was no other choice, because doing nothing felt worse. Thompson visited her before evacuation, arm in a sling. "You saved my life," he said simply. "I'll get to see my daughter graduate." The weight of that hit harder than the attack ever had. Rodriguez wrote everything down, every detail. He said it mattered. Weeks passed. The base returned to routine, but Maria was no longer invisible. Soldiers thanked her, left notes, small gifts. Then came the chaplain. "There's talk of recognition," he said, "and an offer." She listened, stunned, as possibilities she'd never allowed herself to imagine unfolded. That night, alone in her trailer, Maria stared at the ceiling. She thought about the freezer, the choice, the moment fear stopped being louder than purpose. She realized something quietly, without drama. She wasn't the same woman who had arrived counting days. Sometimes, a single night doesn't change who you are. It reveals who you've always been. Why did the days after the attack feel harder than the night itself? Like surviving had opened a door she couldn't close again. Maria woke before dawn now, even when the base was quiet. No alarms, no gunfire, just the hum of generators and the soft thud of boots on gravel, yet her body reacted as if danger were still hunting her, heart racing, breath shallow, hands already bracing for impact. Survival had rewired her. She stood in the mess hall again, stirring pots like she always had. Same stove, same counters, same early morning routine, but everything felt altered, as if the room remembered what had happened and was waiting to see who she would become next. People noticed her now. Not in the loud way she'd feared, not pointing or whispering, just small pauses. A nod held a second longer, a quiet thank you spoken with meaning instead of habit. Maria didn't know where to put any of it. She told herself it was temporary, that once the base settled, once the story faded, she'd disappear back into the background where she belonged. But stories like that don't fade. Rodriguez recovered quickly. Too quickly, some said, pushing his leg harder than the doctors liked. When he limped into the mess hall for the first time after leaving the medical ward, Maria almost dropped the tray she was holding. "You're not supposed to be walking," she said. He smiled. "I got tired of lying down." They sat at one of the back tables, away from others. For a moment, neither spoke. "You know," Rodriguez said finally, "most people freeze." She frowned. "I almost did." "But you didn't." She didn't answer. She was still trying to understand that part herself. Thompson was evacuated to Germany before she could see him again, but he left a note with a medic. A simple thing, 3 lines. "Because of you, I get to go home. Because of you, my daughter still has a father. I won't forget." Maria folded the paper carefully and tucked it into her locker like it was something fragile. The attention grew anyway. Command staff stopped by the kitchen under the pretense of inspections. Medical personnel asked questions, not interrogations, just curiosity wrapped in professional respect. "How did you know where the tunnels were? Where did you learn IV placement like that? Have you ever had formal training?" She answered honestly. "My father taught me some things. I paid attention. I did what needed doing." At night she replayed the freezer door rattling, the voices outside, the moment she chose to stand instead of hide. That choice haunted her more than the gunfire. Because what if she had? One afternoon, Morrison asked her to walk with him. They moved along the perimeter where damage had been repaired but not erased. Burn marks still stained concrete. Shrapnel scars caught sunlight at certain angles. "You don't like the attention," he said. "No, sir." "Why?" She thought before answering. "Because it feels like I stole something, like I took credit for luck." Morrison stopped walking. "Maria," he said quietly, "luck is surviving when you hide. What you did was decide." She looked away. He continued, softer now. "I told you not to be a hero." "I know. And you disobeyed. Yes, sir. A pause. Good. The word landed heavier than praise. A week later, a chaplain came looking for her. Not during a ceremony, not with cameras, just a quiet knock on the kitchen door while bread was rising. Miss Santos, he said gently, there's been a recommendation submitted. Her stomach tightened. For what? Recognition. She almost laughed. I don't need a medal. I know, he said. That's usually who earns them. She tried to refuse, tried to explain she hadn't done anything extraordinary, that anyone would have helped. The chaplain listened patiently. Then he said, most people say that. Most people aren't tested. That night, Maria called her mother. She hadn't told her everything before, hadn't wanted to scare her. This time she did. Her mother cried quietly on the other end of the line, not from fear, from pride. Your father would have done the same, she said. Maria closed her eyes. I didn't do it because of him, she whispered. I know, her mother replied. You did it because of you. That was the part Maria struggled with. Because if this courage, this steadiness under fire, was truly hers, then going back to the life she'd planned felt like turning away from something important. Rodriguez brought it up one evening while they watched the sun bleed into the desert. You ever think about staying? He asked. Staying how? Enlisting, medical corpsman. You already think like one. She shook her head automatically. I'm just a cook. He smiled. You were. The words unsettled her more than he intended. Because deep down, Maria knew the truth. The night of the attack hadn't just saved lives. It had exposed a path she'd been avoiding her whole life. Sometimes survival isn't the end of the story. Sometimes it's the invitation. Why did the offer feel heavier than the gunfire? Like accepting it would mean saying goodbye to the woman she used to be. Maria didn't answer Rodriguez that night. She told herself she needed time, that it was just exhaustion talking, that adrenaline had a way of convincing people they were something more than they really were. The desert sunset faded into cold blue, and she stood alone outside her trailer long after the lights inside the mess hall went dark. The base had resumed its routines, but she felt out of step with them now, like she'd returned to a place that no longer fit her shape. I'm just a cook, she whispered into the quiet. The words didn't sound true anymore. Sleep came in fragments. When it did, it carried images she couldn't shut off. The freezer door rattling, Thompson's breath hitching, Rodriguez's eyes watching her like she was the only solid thing left in the world. She woke before dawn and went to work anyway. That was who she had always been. Someone who showed up. Someone who kept moving forward even when she didn't understand why. But the questions followed her now. The Navy chaplain returned 3 days later, not with ceremony, but with paperwork and patience. The recommendation is already moving, he said gently, standing beside a prep table dusted with flour. You don't have to accept anything, but you should know what's being offered. She listened, arms crossed, heart pounding. The Navy and Marine Corps Medal, the highest non-combat decoration for heroism. And something else. An open door. A chance to enlist, advanced consideration, medical training, a path that led closer to the people she had saved and the ones she might save next. Maria stared at the papers like they might rearrange themselves into a different answer. I came here to help my mother, she said quietly. I didn't come here to become this. The chaplain nodded. Most people don't. After he left, Maria sat alone in the mess hall long after breakfast service ended. Sunlight spilled through dusty windows, illuminating scuffed floors and empty tables. She remembered standing in the same place months earlier, counting days, dreaming about a small restaurant with mismatched chairs and her grandmother's recipes on the wall. That dream had felt safe. This one didn't. Thompson called from Germany, A week later. His voice sounded stronger, lighter. "They say I'll make a full recovery," he told her. "I just wanted you to hear it from me." "I'm glad," she said, and she meant it. There was a pause on the line. "Rodriguez said they might offer you something." She exhaled. Word travels fast. "It does when it's the reason someone's alive," he said. Then quieter, "Whatever you choose, I hope you know you already changed more lives than you realize." When the call ended, Maria sat in silence, phone warm in her hand. She thought about her mother's treatments, about the fear that had driven her halfway across the world, about the freezer, where fear had stopped being enough to keep her still. She thought about the choice. Not hiding, not waiting. Choosing. Morrison spoke to her, near the perimeter fence days later. "I won't advise you one way or the other," he said. "This has to be yours." She nodded. "But," he continued, "if you walk away, you'll still carry what you did. If you stay, you'll learn how to do it again better." That night, Maria wrote a letter she never sent, to the woman she'd been when she arrived. She apologized for underestimating her. She called her mother the next morning. "I might not be coming home right away," Maria said. There was a long pause. Then her mother said, "Are you safe?" "I will be." Another pause, then warmth, pride. "Your father would be smiling," her mother said, "but more than that, I am." The decision didn't feel triumphant. It felt terrifying. She signed the paperwork with hands that trembled, not from fear of failure, but from the weight of commitment. Within weeks, her civilian contract ended, not with relief, but with gratitude. The kitchen staff hugged her goodbye like family. The mess hall felt smaller as she walked out for the last time. She left the apron folded on the counter. Boot camp came faster than she expected. So did doubt. She was older than most recruits, smaller, slower at first. There were moments when her lungs burned and her legs shook and a voice inside whispered, "You don't belong here." She remembered the freezer. She remembered Thompson's breath slowing under her hands. She kept going. Medical training felt different, familiar, like stepping into something she'd been circling her whole life without knowing its name. She learned anatomy, trauma response, field medicine under pressure. Instructors noticed her calm, her focus, the way she didn't panic when others did. She graduated at the top of her class. When orders came assigning her to special operations support, she sat on her bunk staring at the paper, heart pounding. Not pride. Responsibility. Rodriguez visited during her training leave, walking without a limp now. "Told you," he said simply. She smiled. "Thank you," she replied, "for trusting me that night." He shook his head. "You trusted yourself." As Maria stood in her new uniform weeks later, she barely recognized the woman in the mirror. Not because she looked like a soldier, but because she finally understood what strength meant. It wasn't loud. It wasn't fearless. It was choosing to stand when hiding would have been easier, and doing it again when the moment returned. Sometimes redemption doesn't come from fixing the past. Sometimes it comes from answering the future when it calls. Why did the weight of the uniform feel lighter than the apron ever had, like she was finally standing where she was always meant to be? 6 months after the night the base nearly fell, Maria Santos stood beneath a cloudless California sky, her dress blues pressed sharp enough to cut doubt in half. The ceremony unfolded with quiet precision, measured steps, folded flags, names spoken with reverence instead of volume. She stood still, not rigid, grounded. Across the open space, Thompson waited his turn. His shoulder had healed cleanly. His posture was straight. His daughter stood in the crowd behind him, gripping a small flag with both hands like it was something sacred. Maria watched as he received his Purple Heart. When applause rose, it didn't crash over her. It washed through her. She didn't cry. She felt complete. Rodriguez stood beside her, also in dress uniform now. His leg was strong again. He leaned slightly closer. "Never thought I'd see you here," he said quietly. She smiled. "Neither did I." The medal ceremony ended, but the moment lingered. People shook hands. Families embraced. Cameras clicked from a respectful distance. 2 months earlier, Maria had stood in the same place as her own medal was placed gently into her hands. The Navy and Marine Corps medal, heavy, cold, real. Her mother had cried then, openly, unapologetically. She had whispered, "Your father would be so proud." Maria had believed her. Now as Thompson walked past, he stopped. He didn't salute. He hugged her. "Because of you," he said softly, "I get more time." She nodded. That was all she could manage. That night the team gathered for dinner, a tradition resurrected after too many near losses. Not a formal event. No speeches planned, just food, laughter, and stories that bent between humor and gravity. Someone had insisted Maria cook. She refused. So they compromised. She supervised. The table was loud, familiar, real. Morrison, now Commander Morrison, raised his glass when conversation finally slowed. "To Maria," he said, not loudly but clearly, "who taught us that courage doesn't always carry a weapon." Rodriguez lifted his drink, "and that the people we think we're protecting sometimes end up protecting us." Thompson added, "and that sometimes heroes wear aprons before they wear uniforms." Laughter followed, gentle, earned. Maria felt warmth spread through her chest, not pride, not embarrassment, belonging. Later, when the noise faded and plates were cleared, she stepped outside alone. The Pacific air was cool, salted, honest. She thought about Afghanistan, about the woman she'd been in that kitchen, wiping sweat from her brow, counting days until freedom, about how small her world had felt then, how narrow. She hadn't known she was capable of more. She hadn't known she was waiting for a moment that would demand everything. Her life now was harder, longer hours, less certainty, more risk. But also more meaning. She thought about the new corpsmen she'd met during training. Young, nervous, eager. Some of them would hear her story one day, not because she told it, but because others would. She hoped they wouldn't hear it as legend. She hoped they'd hear it as permission. Permission to act. Permission to care. Permission to be more than the role assigned to them. Maria returned inside, where laughter still lingered in the corners. She took her seat among them, not in front, not behind. Just among. Years later, long after deployments blurred together and scars, visible and otherwise, became part of the job, the story would still circulate quietly through the teams. Not exaggerated. Not glorified. Just told. About a night when the base fell silent. About 2 wounded men in a freezer. About a woman who could have hidden, but didn't. New corpsmen would listen. Some would nod, some would doubt. And then they would remember it when fear tried to freeze them in place. Maria Santos never opened the restaurant she once dreamed about. Instead, she learned how to keep people alive in their worst moments, how to stay steady when everything shook, how to stand in the space between panic and hope. She learned that strength doesn't announce itself. It shows up. It stays. It acts. And sometimes, the most important shots aren't the ones fired in anger, but the ones that shatter the life you thought you were meant to live, revealing the one you were always capable of becoming. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.